In the prestigious Oxford High School, 5 friends from wealthy families formed an unbreakable bond. Linda and Lilian are twins and heirs to a business empire. They were known for their captivating charm and identical bright smiles. Sharon, from a family of lawyers, was a bookworm with a sharp mind. Amanda, daughter of a renowned tech mogul, was a genius programmer and inventor. Lovett, daughter of a successful art dealer, was a creative force with a passion for painting. One day, they all landed in detention together, each punished for their respective pranks and mischief. As they worked on their assigned tasks, they discovered they shared privilege and similar upbringings. Linda and Lilian, used to getting attention, were drawn to Lovett's artistic talent. Sharon and Amanda, both introverts, connected over their love of science lab and technology. As they spent more time together, their differences faded, and their friendship grew stronger. Coming from families with high expectations, they supported each other through the pressures of school and family life. The 5 friends were thrill seekers, always on the lookout for their next adrenaline fix. They loved playing rough games that pushed their limits and tested their skills. Their favorite pastime was urban exploration, where they would sneak into off-limits areas like abandoned buildings, rooftops, and hidden tunnels. They'd navigate through treacherous terrain, avoiding obstacles and security patrols. They also enjoyed extreme sports like parkour, free-running, and street racing. Linda and Lilian, being twins, had a special bond that made them a formidable team in paintball and laser tag. Sharon, with her analytical mind, excelled in strategy games like Capture the Flag and escape rooms. Amanda, with his tech expertise, would often hack into security systems to gain access to restricted areas. Lovett, with her artistic flair, loved creating street art and graffiti in hidden corners of the city. Together, they lived for the rush of excitement and the thrill of living on the edge. The next day, the 5 friends gathered in the school cafeteria, chatting and laughing over their lunch. Lovett, looking concerned, leaned in close to the others. "Guys, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard my parents talking last night about a game that's been causing a lot of trouble." "What kind of game?" Linda asked her curiously. "I'm not entirely sure," Lovett replied, "but they mentioned that it's been linked to a bunch of deaths. Apparently, people who play it become obsessed and start to do dangerous things." Sharon's eyes widened. "That sounds creepy. What's the game called?" Lovett hesitated, looking around nervously. "I don't know if I should say. My parents seemed really worried, and they want me to stay away from it." Amanda's eyes lit up with excitement. "Come on, Lovett, spill the beans. We can handle it." Lovett glanced around the canteen, making sure no one was listening. "Okay, but you have to promise not to tell anyone else. It's called the summoning." The others stared at Lovett in disbelief, their expressions ranging from skepticism to outright dismissal. "No way, Lovett, you're just making that up," Linda said, chuckling. "Yeah, right, a game that's killing people." "That's just ridiculous," Lilian added, rolling her eyes. Sharon shook her head. "Lovett, you're always coming up with wild stories. This one's just too far-fetched." Amanda snorted. "You're not serious, are you? Summoning. Sounds like some cheesy horror movie title." Lovetta's face fell, hurt by her friend's disbelief. "I'm telling you, I heard my parents talking about it. They were serious, and they seemed really scared." But the others just laughed and teased her, making jokes about her active imagination and desperate need for attention. Lovett's protests were met with more doubts, and soon the conversation moved on to other topics, leaving her feeling frustrated and isolated. The others, still teasing Lovett, decided to take their criticism to the next level. "Okay, Lovett, if you're so sure about this game, let's make a bet," Amanda said, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "Yeah, if it's true, we'll all apologize and admit you're right," Lilian added, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "But if it's a lie, you have to kiss." Amanda paused, looking around the canteen before pointing to a student in the corner. "Bruno." The others burst out laughing at the suggestion, and Lovetta's face turned bright red with embarrassment. Bruno was indeed one of the ugliest students in school, with a reputation for being awkward and annoying. Lovett protested, "That's not fair. You guys are just trying to humiliate me." But the others were relentless, egging her on to accept the bet. Lovett, feeling trapped and desperate to prove her point, finally agreed. "Fine, I accept your stupid bet. But if I'm right, you guys have to apologize and admit you were wrong." The others cheered and high-fived each other, boldly confident that Lovett would lose the bet. In the hours of darkness, Lovett couldn't shake off the feeling of disgust and embarrassment as she thought about kissing Bruno. The idea of kissing him was unbearable. Her mind was racing with thoughts of the bet and the humiliation she would face the next day. She decided to take matters into her own hands and do some research on the game that had started it all. She pulled out her laptop and began to browse, searching for any information she could find about the summoning game. As she scrolled through websites and forums, she started to realize that there was more to the game than she had initially thought. Players were sharing their experiences, talking about strange occurrences and unexplained events that had happened after playing the game. Some even claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their rooms. Lovetta's heart raced as she read through the post. As the night wore on, Lovett became more and more engrossed in her research, determined to uncover the truth behind the game and the mysterious forces that seemed to be at work. Lovett woke up the next morning, feeling triumphant and relieved. She had uncovered the secret of the summoning game and was now confident that she could play it without risking any further humiliation or danger. As she got ready for school, she felt a sense of determination wash over her. The drive to school was filled with anticipation, her mind racing with scenarios and outcomes. She knew her friends would be waiting for her, eager to see her kiss Bruno, but she was prepared. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding with excitement and a hint of nervousness, as she marched into the fray, ready to face whatever the day might bring. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, the friends gathered in the parking lot, eager to embark on their adventure. They had all bought the necessary items, flashlights, snacks, and foods. They settled into their seats and the excitement was palpable. As they embarked on their quest and journeyed deep into the forest depths. When they finally arrived at the haunted house, the group couldn't help but feel a sense of fear and nervousness. The group hesitated, no one wanting to take the lead, but Lovett, gathered courage, stepped forward, and with that, she pushed open the creaking front door, and they stepped into the unknown. As they ventured deeper into the haunted house, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls, they couldn't help but feel a sense of fear and trepidation. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot, and the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath their feet seemed to echo through the deserted halls. "Wow, this place is seriously creepy," Linda whispered, her eyes scanning the cobweb-covered chandeliers and faded portraits on the walls. Yeah, Lovett replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never seen anything like this. As they explored the labyrinthine mansion, they stumbled upon a grand ballroom, the chandelier above them casting a dim, eerie glow. But it was what lay at the far end of the room that caught their attention. There it is, Lovett said, her eyes fixed on a small coffin sitting atop a dusty pedestal. The material we need is inside that box, she said. But as they approached the pedestal, a strange unsettling feeling began to creep over them. It was as if they were being watched, and the air seemed to grow colder and heavier. Guys, I don't like this, Sharon said, her voice trembling slightly. Come on, it's just our imagination, Amanda replied, but her voice lacked conviction. As they reached for the box, a sudden loud creaking noise echoed through the room, making them all jump, and then the lights went out. As they fumbled for their flashlights, they quickly set up the small wooden coffin and arranged the red candles around it. As they gathered around the coffin, their voices barely above a whisper. Matri tenebri, matri tenebri, matri tenebri, they chanted in unison 3 times. As soon as they finished speaking, the candles suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness once more. The silence was oppressive, heavy with anticipation. But nothing happened. No whisper, no shadowy figure, no sign of the demon they had summoned. Just silence. The group held their breath, frozen in disappointment and fear. They had expected something, anything, to happen. But the darkness remained still and quiet. Finally, Lovett broke the silence. Well, that was underwhelming, she said, her voice laced with disappointment. The others nodded in agreement, their faces illuminated only by the faint glow of their flashlights. They had come so far, and yet, nothing had happened. It was as if the demon had ignored their call, leaving them with only the echoes of their own fear and anticipation. Let's get out of here, Lilian said, with a subdued tone. The others nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on the door, their hearts filled with a sense of relief and disappointment. They had come so far, and yet, nothing had happened. As they turned to leave, the darkness seemed to close in around them, the shadows cast by their flashlights growing longer and more sinister. They knew they had to get out, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the haunted house. But as they reached the door, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, and something was waiting for them in the shadows. As they trudged back to their respective homes, the group couldn't shake off the feeling of exhaustion and unease. The twins, Linda and Lilian, were met with curious gazes from their dad and their elder brother, who were wondering why they were returning so late. Where have you guys been? Their dad asked, eyeing them suspiciously. Linda and Lilian exchanged a quick glance before launching into a rehearsed lie. We were just, studying for our exam at the library, Linda said, trying to sound convincing. Their dad raised an eyebrow. At this hour. Their dad and elder brother exchanged a skeptical look, but seemed to buy the excuse. All right, well, get some rest. You can tell us all about it in the morning, their elder brother said, ushering them towards their bedrooms. As they settled into their beds, Linda and Lilian couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for lying to their dad. But they knew they had to keep their adventure a secret. The next day, the 5 friends gathered in the school courtyard, eager to see the outcome of their bet. Okay, Lovett, it's time to pay up, Amanda said, a mischievous glint in her eye. Lovett looked at them pleadingly. Guys, please, I'm begging you. Don't make me do this, I would do anything else but certainly not kissing Bruno. But the others just laughed. No way, Sharon said, her voice firm. You lost the bet, now you have to pay the price. Bruno, who had been quietly observing the exchange, spoke up. Yeah, Lovett, you have to kiss me now. Lovetta's face turned bright red as she realized she had no escape. She reluctantly leaned in, her lips brushing against Bruno's cheek in a quick, awkward kiss. The others burst out laughing, teasing Lovett mercilessly. Ha ha ha, Lovetta's got a new boyfriend. Lilian joked. Lovett rolled her eyes, feeling embarrassed. Shut up, guys. That was so humiliating. As they went to school canteen, the others cheered and teased her about the failed summoning, enjoying their playful banter. Despite the joking, Lovett knew they were all just happy to have shared in the adventure together. As the day came to a close and the darkness of night began to fall, Sharon finished her relaxing bath and started her evening skincare routine. She was carefully applying her moisturizer and toner, feeling refreshed and calm, when suddenly she heard strange and scary creaking sounds coming from somewhere in her room. As Sharon peeped into her serene room, she was met with an eerie sight. The room was enveloped in an unsettling darkness as if the light had been suffocated. Her curiosity piqued, she stepped inside, her eyes fixed on the faint glow of the dim light. But as she approached the edge of her bed in order to on the light, her feet seemed rooted to the spot, hesitant to take the next step towards the light switch, as if some unseen force was warning her away. Sharon's heart raced as she froze in terror, her eyes fixed on the grotesque figure before her. The woman's face was twisted and disfigured, with sunken eye sockets that seemed to bore into Sharon's soul. The woman's mouth contorted into a snarl. Sharon's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. She tried to scream, but her voice was trapped in her throat. Her legs felt like lead. Refusing to move as the woman began to move closer, her presence filling the room with an unspeakable horror. Suddenly, the woman's face contorted into a twisted grin, revealing jagged teeth stained with decay. Sharon's heart felt like it was about to burst from her chest, as the woman's whispering grew louder, more urgent, and her cold bony fingers reached out to claim her. The next morning, Sharon's parents were waiting for her in the dining room, the breakfast spread out before them. Her mom poured herself a cup of coffee, and her dad looking at his wristwatch. She's running late again, Sharon's mom said to her husband. Her dad shrugged, probably still sleepy. Teenagers and their sleep schedules. But as the minutes ticked by, Sharon's absence became more conspicuous. Her mom got up from her seat. I'll go check on her. She walked to Sharon's room, knocked gently on the door, and called out, Sharon, are you okay? You're running late for breakfast. When there was no response, concern etched on her face. Sharon's mom slowly turned the handle and pushed open the door. Sharon's mom screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice piercing the silence of the house. Her husband, startled by the sudden outburst, rushed to the room, his heart racing with fear. What's wrong? What's happening? He asked, but his wife couldn't respond. She had fainted, collapsing to the floor. He rushed to her side, lifting her up gently. Oh God, what's going on? He muttered to himself, his eyes scanning the room frantically. That's when he saw Sharon, ripped apart motionless on the floor, his eyes frozen in a perpetual stare. His heart skipped a beat as he realized something terribly happened to his daughter. A surge of adrenaline, he scooped up his wife and carried her out of the room, yelling for help. As he frantically rushed out of the room, he yelled to their other child, Emily, call 911. Now. Emily, startled by the sudden commotion, scrambled to grab the phone and dial the emergency number, trying to make sense of the chaotic scene unfolding before them. As Emily spoke to the 911 operator, their dad attempted to revive their mom, shaking her gently and pleading with her to wake up. "Come on, honey, please. Wake up," he begged, his voice laced with desperation. Meanwhile, Emily's hands trembled as he held the phone, trying to relay the situation to the operator. "My mom, she's not breathing. My dad is trying to wake her up, but she's not responding." Emily's voice cracked with fear. Just as Emily finished speaking, the sound of sirens pierced the air, growing louder with each passing moment. The paramedics burst into the house, rushing to Sharon's side. They quickly assessed the situation and sprang into action, loading her onto a stretcher and wheeling her away to the waiting ambulance. As the emergency van sped away, sirens blaring, Emily and their dad were left standing in the chaotic aftermath, trying to process the events that had just unfolded. Back in the school classroom, the remaining 4 friends gathered together. Amanda, still shaken by the strange noises she heard the night before, decided to share her experiences with her friends. "Girls," Amanda said, her eyes wide and laced with concern. "I heard whispers in the living room last night when I was watching a movie. It sounded like someone was walking around the house." Lovett, Linda, and Lilian exchanged amused glances. "Babe, you're such a wimp," Lilian teased. "It was probably just the wind or your imagination." Linda playfully rolled her eyes. "Yeah, Amanda, you're always hearing things that aren't there." Lovett chuckled, "Maybe you're just trying to get attention." Amanda sighed, feeling frustrated that her friends didn't believe her. "I'm telling you, it was real. And it was scary." But her friends just laughed it off, teasing her good-naturedly. As they continued to tease Amanda, they suddenly realized that someone was missing from their group. "Hey, where's Sharon?" Lovett asked, looking around the classroom as if expecting her to appear at any moment. The others stopped laughing and looked at each other with a mixture of confusion and concern. "I don't know, I thought she would be here," Lilian replied, scanning the seats nearby. Amanda pulled out her phone and tried calling Sharon, but it went straight to voicemail. "That's weird, Sharon always answers her phone," Linda said, her brow furrowed with worry. The group fell into an uncomfortable silence, their minds racing with worst-case scenarios. Where was Sharon? And why wasn't she answering her phone? "Let's go check on her," Lovett said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the group. "Yeah, that's unlike her," Amanda said, nodding in agreement. After obtaining permission from the principal, the girls decided to take a stroll and headed towards Sharon's house, unaware of the tragic news that awaited them. When they arrived, they were met with a solemn atmosphere that immediately hinted at something being terribly wrong. Sharon's family was gathered in the living room, their faces etched with grief. And then, they heard the news that shattered their world. "Sharon's gone," her sister said, her voice barely audible. "She passed away last night." The group was stunned, their minds refusing to accept the truth. They cried extremely bitterly, their wails echoing through the house. They had never felt such a deep pain before, a pain that seemed to rip their hearts apart. Lovett fell to the ground, her body shaking with sobs. Their best friend, their companion, their Sharon, was gone. The thought was unbearable, and they wept as if their tears could bring her back. As the night wore on, the group's sobs subsided, replaced by a numb silence. They sat in Sharon's living room, surrounded by the eerie darkness, until the first light of dawn crept in. With heavy hearts, they finally parted ways, each heading back to their respective homes. The twins, Lilian and Linda, walked together in silence, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. As they turned to a corner, they noticed a figure lurking in the shadows. At first, they thought it was just a stray animal, but as the figure got closer, the figure began to take shape. It was tall, gaunt, and impossibly thin, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. The twins froze, their hearts racing with fear. The grotesque figure began to move towards them, its pace slow and deliberate. Linda and Lilian exchanged a terrified glance, and then they ran. They sprinted down the street, their feet pounding the pavement, the figure's eyes fixed on them with an unblinking stare. The twins didn't dare to look back, fearing what they might see. They kept running, their breaths coming in short gasps, their hearts pounding in their chests. As Linda and Lilian ran for their lives, the ground beneath them suddenly gave way, and Linda tumbled into a hidden hole. She fell deep into the darkness, her screams echoing off walls as she plummeted downward. When she finally landed with a loud thud, she found herself in a damp, cold hallways, lit only by faint flickers of eerie green light. The air was thick with stench of decay. Linda rushed over to the school bag, flung it open, and dug out her phone. She swiftly turned it on and on its touchlight, shedding light on the area as she began scanning the area, looking for exit route. Lilian burst through the front door, her face pale and tear-stained. "Dad," she cried, gasping for breath. Her father, concerned, rushed to her side. "Lilian, what's wrong?" "What happened?" Lilian's words stumbled out in a frantic jumble. "Linda, the demon, it took her. We were running, and it chased us, then it disappeared, and Linda was gone," she said, panting. Her father's expression turned grim. "I'll go to the police station and report her missing. You stay here with your brother and try to calm down." Lilian nodded, feeling a mix of fear and guilt. She should have stayed with Linda and done something to save her. Her mind racing with scenario and couldn't ease the ache in her heart. As her father left, Lilian collapsed onto the couch, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. She couldn't shake the image of Linda being tormented by the demon, her screams echoing in her mind. The darkness outside seemed to press in, as if the demon was watching and waiting. Lilian's heart raced with every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves. She knew she wouldn't rest until Linda was back home, safe and sound, back in the underground pit. Linda was so much terrified and was sobbing. Armed with her phone flashlight, she started looking for a way out. The pit was deeper than she expected, and as she reached the bottom, the air grew cold and damp. The walls were lined with ancient stone, slick with moisture and covered in moss. The only sound was the distant dripping of water echoing through the tunnels branching off from the main chamber. She searched for the way out. Her phone flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing strange, faded symbols etched into the stone. A sense of unease settled over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. As the hours passed, the atmosphere grew heavier. A cold draft whispered through the tunnels, carrying with it an eerie, almost human moan. Linda's heart raced as she turned, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. She could have sworn she saw a shadow move, just at the edge of the light. She tried to calm herself, telling herself it was just her imagination. But then the whispers began. Soft at first, indistinct, but growing louder and more insistent. They seemed to come from all around her, echoing off the stone walls. "Who's there?" she screamed out, her voice echoing back at her. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. Linda's breath came in short gasps as she strained to hear anything, but the silence was deafening. Then, the laughter started. Low and mocking, it filled the chamber, coming from every direction. She spun around, her phone flashlight flickering, casting long, sinister shadows. In one of the tunnels, She saw it, a figure, barely more than a silhouette, with eyes glowing a sickly yellow. It was grinning at her, its teeth sharp and gleaming in the darkness. Panic surged through her as she stumbled back, her phone torchlight slipping from her grasp and clattering to the ground. The phone flickered and went off, plunging her into darkness. She could hear the figure moving closer, the sound of its footsteps echoing off the walls. The whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. Objects began to move in the darkness, stones shifting and scraping against each other, the sound amplified in the confined space. "You're mine," a voice hissed, closer now, almost in her ear. She felt a cold, clammy hand brush her shoulder, and she screamed, her voice echoing through the tunnels. She tried running very fast, but her feet were too weak. The demon's presence was a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on her. It whispered her name over and over, each time with more venom and malice. She felt an invisible force grip her, pulling her towards the center of the chamber. Linda tried to fight it, but it was too strong. The demon's laughter filled her head as it took control, her own consciousness fading into the background. She felt her limbs move, but it was not her will driving them. Her vision blurred, and she saw her own hands, pale and claw-like, reaching out in front of her. The last thing she saw before everything went black, her reflection in a pool of stagnant water at her feet, as glowing a malevolent yellow, the demon's grin on her face. The eerie silence of the underground tunnels was broken only by the distant dripping of water echoing off the damp walls. Linda's father's breath was ragged, a mixture of fear and exhaustion. The search warrant clutched in his trembling hand had been his last resort. Now, he could only hope it wasn't too late. Detective Harris, with a flashlight in one hand and a map of the underground system in the other, led the team deeper into the labyrinthine passages. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and every step echoed ominously. Then, a chilling cry pierced the darkness. "Over here." Officer Reynolds' voice was laced with urgency as he discovered Linda's lifeless body in a shadowed alcove. Her father's anguished cry echoed through the tunnels, a heart-shattering "No, Lilian, no" that seemed to shake the very foundations of the underground. The team stood in solemn silence, their flashlights illuminating the unspeakable tragedy. The weight of their loss hung heavy in the air, a suffocating grief that threatened to consume them all. Linda's father knelt beside her, his tears falling like rain as he whispered a desperate "why?" As they carried Linda's lifeless body back to the surface, Linda's father remained kneeling by her side. The search ended in the most devastating way possible, and the underground tunnels, with their dark secrets and silent echoes. Lilian was pacing to and fro in the living room, still feeling uneasy, while her brother left to his room to ease himself. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. Lilian looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw Linda standing in the doorway, her face looking pale. "Linda!" Lilian exclaimed, jumping up and rushing to her twin sister. She enveloped her in a warm hug and asked, "Did you see Dad?" But Linda ignored the question. Lilian's eyes widened in horror as her twin sister smiled sinisterly. She had no idea that the demon had taken on her sister's form, and she felt a sense of unease as it drew closer. "Let's go to our room, Lilian," the demon said in a voice that was identical to her sister's. Lilian's heart raced as she followed the demon to their bedroom, feeling a sense of dread building up inside her. As soon as they entered the room, the demon slammed the door shut behind them, and Lilian heard the sound of her older brother knocking on the door, calling out to her. "Lilian, come out. I need to tell you something." The demon's grin grew wider as it began to transform into a grotesque parody of her sister. Lilian's eyes were fixed on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's going on?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The demon's laughter was like a cold wind, sending chills down her spine. "Your brother has something to tell you, Lilian," it said, its voice dripping with malice. As the knocking on the door grew louder, Lilian's elder brother's voice boomed through the door, "Lilian, open up." Just then, the demon vanished, and the door suddenly flew open, causing her older brother to tumble to the ground. "It's about your sister." Lilian's eyes widened in shock as her older brother struggled to get up from the floor, her mind racing with questions. What was going on? Who was that thing that looked like her sister? And what did her brother want to tell her? As her brother gets back to his feet, he looked at her with a mixture of concern and fear. "Lilian, I've been trying to tell you something," he said, his voice shaking. "Something about your sister." Lilian's heart skipped a beat. "What about her?" she asked. Her brother hesitated, looking around the room nervously. She is dead," he said finally. "I think something's terrible happened to her." Lilian's mind reeled as she tried to process this information. Her sister is dead. What? How was that possible? Does that mean? Just then, a cold breeze swept through the room, making Lilian shiver. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see her sister standing in the doorway, a sinister grin spreading across her face. But something was off. Her sister's eyes seemed darker, her smile twisted. Lilian's brother asked her what was wrong, but she couldn't explain. Every time she tried to tell him about the demon, she felt a strange sensation, like a hand was clamped over her mouth. I don't know," she stuttered, feeling a creeping sense of dread. Her brother looked at her, concerned. "What's going on, Lilian? You can tell me." But Lilian couldn't. The demon's presence was suffocating her, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. She tried to speak, but her words were garbled, nonsensical. Her brother's expression changed from concern to confusion. "Lilian, what's wrong with you?" he asked, shaking her gently. But Lilian was beyond reason. The demon's bewitching was too strong, too powerful. She was trapped in a living nightmare that she couldn't escape. Lilian's eyes stared blankly, her face empty. She was under the demon's spell and couldn't resist. Her brother shook her, trying to snap her out of it, but she didn't respond. "Lilian, wake up," he shouted, his voice filled with fear. But Lilian was trapped in a realm of darkness and fear. The demon was too strong and had full control over her. She was now its puppet, bound to its will. Her brother watched in horror as Lilian fell to the floor. The demon's sinister laughter filled the room. Lilian's brother let out a loud scream when he found her lying unconscious on the floor. His hands were shaking badly as he dialed emergency services, his heart pounding with fear. He lifted her limp body and rushed her to the hospital, his mind racing with panic and desperation. The drive felt like an eternity as he begged her to stay with him, to hold on just a little longer. When they reached the hospital, the door slid open, and a group of nurses and doctors quickly came to help. They took Lilian from his arms and placed her on a stretcher, then hurriedly wheeled her away. He tried to follow, but a nurse gently held him back and assured him they would do everything they could. He stood there feeling utterly helpless as the emergency room doors closed, separating him from his sister. Hours passed in a blur of sterile white walls and the constant hum of hospital machinery. He sat in the waiting room, his mind filled with worry. Finally, a doctor came out, looking very serious. "She's in a coma," the doctor said softly. "We've done all we can for now. It's up to her to wake up." The news hit him hard, leaving him feeling numb. He nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle heavily on his shoulders. The next morning, Amanda sat at the dining table with her parents. The air was thick with tension. The smell of breakfast coming from the kitchen was a stark contrast to the heavy mood hanging over the house. They waited in silence, Amanda lost in her own thoughts, the worry about Sharon's condition weighing heavily on her. Amanda's stomach churned with anxiety, and she had no appetite. As they sat there, the house help emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray full of food. Amanda looked up, still feeling tired and worried from the night before. She blinked, trying to clear her mind, but as she looked at the house help's face, her blood ran cold. The woman's features twisted and changed into a grotesque, demonic face. Her eyes glowed with a scary, evil light, and her mouth stretched into a sinister grin. Amanda's heart pounded in her chest, and fear surged through her like a tidal wave. Her breath caught in her throat, and her vision blurred as panic set in. She jumped up from her chair, knocking it over with a loud crash. "No!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Get away from me!" Her parents turned to her, their faces full of confusion and concern. "Amanda, what's wrong?" her mother asked, her voice trembling. But Amanda was already running, her mind filled with terror. She ran from the dining room, her footsteps echoing through the house. She burst through the front door, the bright morning light momentarily blinding her. She stumbled down the steps, her heart racing, the image of the demon's face burned into her mind. Outside, she paused, gasping for breath. Her thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind, and she struggled to understand what had just happened. Her rational mind tried to tell her it had to be a hallucination, a trick of her exhausted, anxiety-ridden brain. But the fear felt too real to ignore. Her parents caught up to her, their faces pale with worry. "It's okay," her mother soothed, wrapping her arms around her trembling daughter. Amanda was taken back inside the house by her parents. Still feeling a mix of fear and nervousness as her parents comforted her. Needing to talk to someone, she decided to call her twins, but their number was not going through, so she called Lovett instead. As the phone rang, Amanda could feel her heart pounding, hoping that talking to Lovett would help her calm down. Lovett was just waking up in her room when her phone buzzed. She reached over and saw Amanda's name on the screen. With sober tone she answered, "Hey, Amanda." "Hey, Lovett," Amanda said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm going crazy, Lovett. I keep seeing demons." Lovett got out of bed, still feeling groggy. "A demon? Stop joking, you're probably hallucinating," she said. "Lovett, come on, if you said so, then what happened to Sharon? What was the cause behind her mysterious death?" Amanda said, trying to sound convincing. "Babe, I think you're making sense." She walked over to the window to open the curtains, wanting to let some light into the room. As she pulled the curtains aside, she froze. A grotesque figure was standing outside, staring directly at her through the window. Its skin was pale and wrinkled, and its eyes were hollow and empty. The figure's twisted mouth seemed to form a sinister grin, sending chills down Lovett's spine. "Oh my God," Lovett whispered, her voice trembling. What's wrong?" Amanda asked, panic rising in her voice. Lovett dropped the phone, unable to tear her eyes away from the horrifying figure. She backed away slowly, her heart racing. The figure didn't move but continued to stare, its presence overwhelming and terrifying. Lovett, are you there?" Amanda's voice came through the phone, but Lovett couldn't respond. She was paralyzed with fear, her mind racing with thoughts of what this thing could be and why it was staring at her. Finally, mustering all her courage, Lovett managed to grab the phone and whisper, "Amanda, there's something outside my window. It's horrible." Amanda's blood ran cold. "Lock your window and get away from it, Lovett. Now." Lovett did as she was told. She quickly locked the window and pulled the curtains shut. Her hands were shaking as she backed away. She decided to pack a few clothes and rushed to her wardrobe. As soon as she opened it, the demon's face emerged from the darkness inside and then disappeared instantly, scaring her terribly. Lovett fell to the ground screaming, her cries echoing through the house. Her mom rushed into the room, panic etched on her face. Seeing Lovett curled up and shaking, she quickly gathered her in her arms and took her to her room, consoling her as best as she could. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now," her mom whispered, stroking her hair. Lovetta's heart was still racing, and her body trembled with fear. Once she calmed down a bit, Lovett reached for her phone and called Amanda back. "Amanda, I'm terrified," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I can't stop shivering. That thing, it was so real." Amanda tried to comfort her. "I know, Lovett. Just try to breathe. We'll figure this out together, okay?" Lovett nodded, though Amanda couldn't see her. She took deep breaths, trying to calm her nerves. "Thank you, Amanda. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You're not alone in this," Amanda assured her. "We'll get through it." Lovetta's mom stayed with her until she fell asleep, but Lovetta's sleep was restless. She kept seeing the demon's face in her dreams, its hollow eyes staring into her soul. When Lovett woke up the late night, she felt exhausted. She couldn't let the fear control her. Determined to understand what was happening, she brought out her laptop and began researching. She typed furiously, searching for any clue that could help unravel the mystery behind the summoning. Her eyes scanned through pages of information, ancient rituals, and dark legends. The more she read, the more she realized how deep and dangerous this mystery was. But Lovett was determined. She wouldn't let this terrifying figure control her life. Hours passed, and the night grew darker. Lovetta's room was filled with the eerie glow of her laptop screen as she delved deeper into the secrets of the summoning. She found mentions of grotesque figures, warnings of the dangers they posed, and cryptic hints about how to stop them. Every now and then, a chill would run down her spine as she recalled the haunting image of the figure outside her window. But she pressed on, knowing that the answers she sought were within reach. She had to be brave, for herself and for Amanda. Together, they would face this terror and uncover the truth. The next morning, Lovett and Amanda started their journey back to the haunted house. Determined to banish the evil that is tormenting them, they carried their sacred tools and whispered prayers for protection. The sun barely pierced the thick canopy of trees that lined their path, casting eerie shadows that danced and twisted in the early light. When they arrived at the foreboding mansion, its decaying structure loomed ominously before them. As they approached the front door, a chilling wind swept through the grounds, carrying with it whispers of malevolent intent. Just as they were about to step inside, the air around them darkened, and a bone-chilling cold enveloped their bodies. Out of the shadows emerged a demon. Its eyes burning with a malevolent fire and its form shifting and writhing as if made of pure darkness. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the demon let out a guttural growl, its voice echoing through their very souls. Lovett and Amanda raised their blessed artifacts, chanting the ancient words of exorcism, but their voices faltered as the demon's power surged. The demon lunged at them, its claws slashing through the air with terrifying speed. Lovett was thrown against the wall, her head ringing with pain, while Amanda was knocked to the ground, the sacred text scattering from her grasp. The demon's presence grew stronger, feeding off their fear and desperation. It roared. A sound that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself, and a dark force pinned them both to the ground. The weight of the demon's of exorcism. Desperation etched on their faces. Lovett and Amanda struggled against the invisible force holding them down. Their breaths came in ragged gasps as they fought to regain control, but the demon's hold was unyielding. They could feel their energy draining away, their hope slipping through their fingers like sand. In a final act of defiance, Lovett managed to whisper a prayer for protection, her voice barely audible. The demon recoiled for a brief moment, its form flickering, but it quickly regained its strength, its malevolent gaze locking onto them once more. As darkness threatened to consume them, Lovett and Amanda realized that they were no match for this ancient evil. As they tried to run away from the haunted house, the demon came back, but this time with full force. Its dark energy surged, crackling through the air like a violent. Lovett and Amanda barely had time to react before the demon's power enveloped them. Lovett felt a searing pain shoot through her body, as if her very soul was being ripped apart. The demon's eyes locked onto hers, and she could feel its malevolent presence invading her mind, taking over her thoughts. She tried to resist, but the demon's power was overwhelming, its grip tightening with each passing second. Amanda, realizing the terrible situation, shouted Lovett's name, but it was too late. Lovett's eyes turned black as the demon fully possessed her, a wicked grin spreading across her face. Amanda felt a surge of terror, knowing she was no match for the demon's strength. Lovett! Amanda screamed, but her friend's voice was no longer her own. The demon laughed, a dark, hollow sound that sent chills down Amanda's spine. "You can't save her," the demon taunted, using Lovett's voice. "Run, little girl. Run while you still can." Amanda's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't stay, not when the demon had taken control of Lovett. With a heavy heart, she turned and fled from the haunted house, her footsteps echoing through the corridors as she ran. As Amanda burst through the front door and into the daylight, she could still hear the demon's laughter ringing in her ears. She didn't stop running until she was far from the house, her breath coming in ragged gasps and her legs burning with exhaustion. Collapsing to the ground, Amanda's thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and determination. She couldn't leave Lovett behind, not like this. She had to find a way to save her friend, to banish the demon once and for all. But for now, she needed help. Gathering her strength, Amanda rose to her feet, entered the car they came with, and journeyed back to town. Amanda rushed to Lovett's house, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She banged on the door, her breath still ragged from the run. Lovett's mother answered, her face filled with concern. "Amanda, what's wrong?" she asked, worry evident in her voice. "It's Lovett," Amanda gasped. "She's been possessed by a demon at the haunted house. We need to get her, now." Lovett's parents exchanged a horrified glance before springing into action. Without wasting any time, they grabbed their coats and followed Amanda back to the haunted house. The journey seemed to take forever, but finally, they stood before the ominous structure once more. The house loomed even more menacingly than before, its dark windows seeming to watch them with malicious intent. As they stepped inside, a palpable sense of dread filled the air, and the temperature dropped sharply. "Where is she?" Lovett's father asked, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "This way," Amanda said, leading them through the dark corridors. The atmosphere grew heavier with each step, and whispers of malevolent intent seemed to echo around them. When they reached where Lovett was, they found her bound by an unseen force, her eyes black and her face twisted in a grotesque expression. The demon within her snarled as they entered, its presence almost tangible. Lovett, her mother cried, rushing to her side. She reached out, but an invisible barrier threw her back. Lovett's father, desperate to save his daughter, tried to break through the barrier, but it was no use. The demon's hold on Lovett was too strong. "We need to get her out of here," Amanda said urgently. "This place is amplifying the demon's power." With a mix of fear and determination, Lovett's parents and Amanda worked together to lift Lovett. She writhed and screamed, the demon's fury evident in her contorted features. But they didn't falter. Together, they carried her, the weight of the demon's presence pressing down on them. As they made their way through the house, the walls seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and the air grew colder. The demon fought them every step of the way, but their determination was unyielding. Finally, they burst through the front door and into the daylight's change was immediate. The oppressive darkness of the haunted house was replaced by the warmth of the sun. Lovett's screams subsided, and her body went limp in their arms. "We need to find help," Amanda said, her voice steady despite the terror that had gripped her heart. Lovett's parents nodded, their faces etched with worry and resolve. They carried their daughter away from the haunted house, vowing to do whatever it took to save her. The battle was far from over, but together, they would find a way to banish the darkness and bring Lovett back. When they finally reached home, Lovett was taken to her room, her body still limp and unresponsive. Her mother gently laid her on the bed, tears streaming down her face as she whispered words of comfort to her unconscious daughter. Lovett's father didn't waste a moment. He grabbed his car keys and rushed out the door, speeding towards the church to seek help from Reverend James, known for his expertise in exorcisms. The drive felt like an eternity as he prayed for his daughter's safety. Meanwhile, Amanda's phone rang. She saw it was her parents calling and answered, trying to steady her trembling hands. "Amanda, where are you?" "Come home right now," her mother said, concern in her voice but unaware of the grave danger Lovett was in. "Mom, I can't leave Lovett." Amanda began, but her mother interrupted. "Amanda, this isn't a discussion. Come home immediately." Torn between her own safety and her friend's dire situation, Amanda took a deep breath. "Okay, I'm on my way." Hanging up, Amanda felt a pang of guilt, but she knew she couldn't disobey her parents. She glanced back at Lovett's house, her heart heavy with worry. "I'll be back soon, Lovett. Hang in there." As she left, Lovett's mother stayed by her daughter's side, holding her hand and praying for the Reverend's swift arrival. The house was filled with an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the occasional groan from Lovett as the demon's hold on her remained strong. Lovett's father finally reached the church and burst through the doors, his desperation evident. "Reverend James, please. My daughter needs your help. She's possessed by a demon." Reverend James looked at him with grave concern and immediately began gathering his exorcism tools. "Lead the way," he said, his voice calm but determined. Back at Lovett's house, the tension was palpable. The minutes felt like hours as her mother anxiously awaited the return of her husband and the Reverend. Amanda, now on her way home, could only hope that help would arrive in time to save her friend. Reverend James and Lovett's father arrived shortly after, their faces set with determination. The Reverend took a deep breath before entering the house, feeling the oppressive energy even from outside. He hurried to Lovett's room, where her mother looked up with tear-filled eyes. "Please, Reverend, save my daughter." Reverend James nodded, setting up his tools and preparing for the exorcism. "We will save her," he said firmly, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Let's begin." As the Reverend started chanting the ancient rites, the room grew colder, and Lovatta's body convulsed violently. The battle was just beginning, but with faith and determination, they hoped to drive the demon out and bring Lovett back to them. Amanda reached home, her heart heavy with worry for Lovett. As she stepped through the door, her parents were waiting in the living room, their faces filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Amanda, where have you been?" her mother asked, her gaze piercing. Amanda hesitated for a moment, then forced a smile. "I was just visiting a friend," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Her father raised an eyebrow. "You've been acting strange lately." "We were worried." Amanda nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't tell them the truth, not yet. "I'm fine, really. Just a lot on my mind." Her mother sighed, exchanging a look with her father. "We know things have been tough for you lately. That's why we decided to bring someone in to help." Amanda's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Just then, a woman stepped into the room, her demeanor calm and professional. "Hello, Amanda. I'm Dr. Mitchell. Your parents have asked me to talk to you." Amanda's eyes widened. "A therapist?" "Mom, Dad, I don't need, it's just to talk," her father interjected gently. "We want to make sure you're okay." Amanda felt trapped, but she knew arguing wouldn't help. "Okay," she said softly, glancing back at the door, her thoughts still on Loveth. "I'll talk." Dr. Mitchell smiled reassuringly. "Why don't we sit down and chat for a bit? Your parents will give us some privacy." Amanda followed the therapist to a quiet corner of the living room. As they sat down, Dr. Mitchell studied her with kind eyes. "Your parents are worried about you. Is there anything you'd like to share?" Amanda bit her lip, struggling with the urge to confide in someone about the horrors she had witnessed and been through. She had been seeing demons a lot lately, through vivid hallucinations that felt terrifyingly real. "I've just been stressed," she said carefully. "School, friends, you know how it is." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "It's normal to feel overwhelmed sometimes. Your parents mentioned you've been seeing things. Do you want to talk about that?" Amanda's heart raced. She couldn't tell the therapist about the demons, not without sounding crazy. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "Just my imagination running wild." Dr. Mitchell continued to ask gentle questions, trying to get Amanda to open up. Amanda answered as vaguely as she could, her mind still racing with thoughts of Lovetta's predicament. Meanwhile, back at Lovetta's house, Reverend James was deep in the exorcism, his voice steady as he chanted the sacred rites. Lovetta's body convulsed violently, the demons hold strong but wavering under the power of the Reverend's faith. Lovetta's parents watched with bated breath, praying for their daughter's salvation. The room was filled with a palpable tension, the air thick with the battle between light and darkness. As Amanda's session with Dr. Mitchell continued, she couldn't shake the feeling of guilt for not being there for Loveth. She knew she needed to find a way to return, to help in any way she could. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Mitchell concluded their session. "Thank you for talking with me, Amanda. Remember, it's okay to ask for help when you need it." Amanda nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Dr. Mitchell." Her parents re-entered the room, looking hopeful. "How do you feel, sweetie?" her mother asked. "I'm fine," Amanda replied, standing up. Amanda was feeling hungry after her long session with the therapist, so she decided to dish herself some food in the kitchen. She hoped a meal might help calm her nerves and give her a moment of peace. As she stood in front of the stove, scooping out food from the pot, an eerie chill swept through the room. Suddenly, the plates on the counter began to rattle. Amanda froze, her heart pounding. The rattling grew louder, and before she could react, the plates flew into the air, shattering themselves against the walls and floor. Amanda screamed, her eyes wide with terror. A sharp pain shot through her hand as a shard of ceramic cut her skin. Blood began to drip on the floor. The room seemed to warp around her. Dark shadows creeping in at the edges of her vision. "Mom," she screamed, her voice trembling with fear. Her mother rushed into the kitchen, her face pale with concern. "Amanda, what's wrong?" Amanda pointed to the chaos around her, her hand still bleeding. "The plates, they flew, they broke." But as her mother looked around, her expression shifted from worry to confusion. The kitchen was perfectly arranged, like nothing had happened. The plates were all in their proper places, unbroken. "Amanda," her mother said softly, with caution. "There's nothing here. The kitchen is fine." Amanda stared in disbelief. The blood on her hand was real, the pain sharp and undeniable, but the shattered plates were gone. Her mind reeled as she realized the truth: she had been hallucinating. The demon was tormenting her through terrifying visions, making it impossible to distinguish reality from illusion. Her mother gently took her injured hand, cleaning the cut and wrapping it with a bandage. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her deep worry. Amanda's heart ached with the weight of her fear and confusion. She realized she couldn't trust her own senses. Every shadow, every creak in the house, seemed to harbor a lurking threat. The demon's influence was growing stronger, making her question her own sanity. "Amanda, you need to rest," her mother said, her voice firm but kind. "You've been through a lot." Amanda nodded numbly, knowing her mother was right. She felt exhausted, drained by the relentless onslaught of hallucinations. She made her way to her room, her thoughts a wall of fear and confusion. Lying in bed, Amanda couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows in the corners of her room seemed to move on their own, taking on sinister shapes. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the visions to disappear, but the terror remained. Her mind was a battleground, and the demon's torment showed no sign of letting up. Amanda was restless in her room, her nerves frayed and on edge. Every little sound seemed magnified, each creak of the floorboards or rustle of the curtains sending shivers down her spine. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse and shift, taking on sinister forms that made her heart race with terror. Suddenly, her phone began ringing, the sound distorted and twisted into a horrific, otherworldly tone. The ringtone was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and shrill. Amanda's eyes widened in fear as she fumbled to grab the phone, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She answered it, but all she could hear was a low, guttural growl on the other end. She screamed, her voice breaking with sheer terror. "Dad! Help me!" Her father rushed into the room, his face a mask of concern. He sat beside her, wrapping his arms around her trembling body. "It's okay, Amanda. I'm here," he said, his voice soothing. But as he held her, Amanda's fear intensified. His comforting presence began to walk before her eyes. His face twisted and contorted, transforming into a grotesque, demonic visage. His eyes turned black, and a wicked grin spread across his face as he laughed maniacally. Amanda screamed again, pushing him away. "No! Get away from me!" She bolted from the room, her heart pounding in her chest. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in on her. She ran blindly, desperate to escape the horrors that seemed to follow her every step. Her mother appeared at the end of the hallway, her face twisted into the same demonic grin. "Amanda, my dear," the demonic voice taunted, "where are you going?" Amanda's breath came in ragged gasps as she backed away, her mind racing with panic. "No, this can't be real," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She turned and fled, her feet barely touching the ground as she raced down the stairs and out the front door. The world outside seemed blurred and distorted. Her vision swimming with fear and confusion. She ran out of the house, desperate to escape the nightmare that had overtaken her life. But as she reached the street, a blinding light engulfed her. A speeding vehicle barreled toward her, its horn blaring. Amanda's scream echoed in the night, a final, desperate cry for help that went unheard. The world grew silent, her torment finally coming to an end. Amanda lay motionless, her haunted eyes staring blankly at the night sky. The demons that had tormented her were gone, leaving only a broken body and shattered hearts in their wake. Her parents found her moments later, their screams of anguish piercing the night. They knelt beside her, their grief overwhelming as they held their lifeless daughter in their arms. The nightmare was over, but the pain would linger, a haunting reminder of the horrors Amanda had faced alone. The living room of Lovetta's house was a chaotic mix of desperation and fear. The furniture had been pushed aside to make space, the curtains drawn tightly to keep out the prying eyes of the night. Candles flickered on every surface, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and the echoes of whispered prayers. Lovetta's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okoye, stood to the side, their faces pale and drawn. Mrs. Okoye clutched a rosary in her trembling hands, her lips moving in silent prayer, while Mr. Okoye held her close, his expression one of helplessness and dread. Their daughter, once so full of life, now lay on the floor. Her body twisted and contorted, her eyes glowing with a sickly, unnatural light. The demon inside her was strong, and it had taken over every part of her being. Reverend James, the exorcist priest, stood at the center of the room, his brow furrowed in concentration as he held up a crucifix, his voice steady but strained as he chanted the words of the exorcism. Lovetta's body convulsed violently with each word, the demon within her fighting with all its might to remain in control. "By the power of God, I command you to leave this innocent soul." Reverend James' voice rang out, firm and unwavering, though the strain was evident in his eyes. He splashed holy water over Lovett, and her skin sizzled where the drops landed. A hiss escaping from her lips as the demon recoiled. The battle raged on, minutes stretching into agonizing hours. Lovetta's screams filled the room, her voice twisted and distorted by the demon that held her captive. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing colder as the struggle reached its peak. Reverend James' voice grew hoarse, his energy nearly depleted, but he refused to stop. And then, with a final, earth-shattering scream, Lovetta's body arched upward, her back bending at an unnatural angle. The light in her eyes flickered and then faded, leaving them dull and empty as she collapsed onto the floor, still and silent. For a moment, the room was eerily quiet, the only sound the ragged breathing of those who had witnessed the horrific scene. Father Michael lowered the crucifix, his hands shaking as he reached out to check Lovetta's pulse. Relief washed over him as he felt the faint thump beneath his fingers. She was alive. "She's free," he said, his voice thick with exhaustion and emotion. "The demon is gone." Lovetta's parents rushed to her side, Mrs. Okoye falling to her knees as she cradled her daughter's head in her lap, sobbing with relief. Mr. Okoye knelt beside them, his hand resting on Lovetta's shoulder. His eyes filled with gratitude. But as they rejoiced, the demon slipped out of the room unnoticed and unseen. The demon had indeed been cast out of Lovett, but it had not been destroyed. It slithered through the cracks in the walls, out into the night, searching for a new host. A few streets away, a young woman walked down the road, unaware of the terror that had just transpired. She hummed softly to herself, her steps light and carefree as she made her way home. The night was calm, the air warm with a gentle breeze. The demon found her. In an instant, her body jerked violently, her head snapping back as the demon took hold. Her eyes, once bright and clear, clouded over with a dark, sinister light. She stumbled, her breath catching in her throat as she fought against the sudden wave of fear and confusion that gripped her. But it was too late. The demon had claimed her. As Lovetta's parents wept with relief inside their home, believing the nightmare to be over, the darkness continued its journey, now lurking within the unsuspecting figure of a young woman walking alone under the night sky. Lovett woke the next morning, the weight of her ordeal pressing down on her like a heavy shroud. The previous night's events lingered in the air, a thick fog of terror and sorrow that refused to dissipate. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the memories of the demon's torment still fresh in her mind. But there was something else, something even more painful that gnawed at her soul. It was the memory of her friends, her 4 closest companions, whose lives had been tragically cut short in the midst of the nightmare. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okoye, entered her room quietly, their faces etched with concern. They had hardly slept, their minds consumed with the horror of what had happened to their daughter. Lovett looked up at them, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. She knew she had to tell them everything, about the demon, about her friends, about the deadly consequences of their ill-fated decisions. "Mom, Dad," she began, her voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you." Mr. Okoye sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "We're here for you, Lovett. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Lovett took a deep breath, then recounted the whole saga, the summoning of the demon, the pact they had made, and the horror that had followed. She spoke of her 4 best friends, the girls who had been like sisters to her, and how they had all been drawn into the dark web of the supernatural. She described how the demon had slowly turned their lives into a living hell, claiming the lives of her friends one by one until she was the only one left. As she spoke, tears streamed down her face, her voice breaking with the weight of the truth. "It's all my fault," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If I hadn't agreed to that stupid ritual, they'd still be alive." Mrs. Okoye's heart broke for her daughter. She reached out, pulling Lovett into a tight embrace. "Oh, my darling," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You were all just children, playing with something far beyond your understanding. It wasn't your fault." Mr. Okoye, his eyes glistening with tears, nodded in agreement. "We can't change the past, Lovett. What's done is done. But we can choose how we move forward." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the tragedy hanging heavy in the room. Lovetta's parents exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew what had to be done. "We forgive you, Lovett," Mr. Okoye said softly, his voice firm but gentle. "We love you, and nothing will ever change that. But we need to make amends for what happened, for the sake of your friends and their families." The next morning, Lovett and her parents prepared themselves for the difficult task ahead. They knew they had to visit the homes of Lovatars for best friends, houses that had been turned into places of mourning. The thought of facing the grieving families filled them with dread, but they knew it was the right thing to do. The drive to each house was solemn, the air inside the car thick with tension. Lovat sat in the back seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea how her friends' families would react, but she knew she had to try. She owed it to her friends. The first stop was Amanda's house. Her parents, who had aged visibly since their daughter's death, opened the door with weary eyes. When they saw Lovat and her parents standing there, the air grew tense, but they let them in. Lovat, barely able to meet their gaze, fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she choked out, her voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please, forgive me." Amanda's mother, a woman who had once been full of warmth and laughter, looked at Lovat with a mix of sorrow and anger. Her husband placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her the strength to speak. "What happened was tragic, Lovat," she said slowly. "Our daughter is gone, and nothing can bring her back. But you were her friend, and I know she wouldn't want us to hold on to this anger forever." Amanda's father nodded, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "We forgive you, Lovat. It won't be easy, but we have to let go and try to heal." Lovat sobbed, overcome with relief and grief. Her parents stepped forward, offering words of condolence, and after what felt like an eternity, they left the house, having found a sliver of peace. The visits to the other 3 houses followed in a similar fashion, each family torn between their sorrow and the need for closure. Lovatar's apologies were met with varying degrees of acceptance, but in the end, each family chose to forgive, understanding that their daughters had loved Lovat, and that holding on to anger would only prolong their pain. After what seemed like the longest day of their lives, Lovat and her parents returned home, their hearts heavy but a little lighter with the knowledge that they had done what they could to make amends. A few days later, the funeral for Lovatar's 4 best friends was held. The families decided to bury the girls together, a final act of unity in life and death. The cemetery was filled with mourners, people who had known the girls, who had loved them, and who were devastated by the loss of such young lives. Lovat stood at a distance with her parents, her eyes fixed on the 4 caskets that were being lowered into the ground. Each casket was identical, adorned with flowers and mementos from the girls' short lives. The sight was almost too much to bear, and Lovat felt a crushing weight on her chest as she watched the earth swallow up her friends. The priest's voice droned on, offering words of comfort and prayers for the departed. But Lovat barely heard him. All she could think about was how different things could have been, how they should have been planning their futures together, not burying their dreams in the cold ground. After the ceremony, Lovat approached the graves, her parents close behind. She knelt by each one, placing a single white rose on the freshly turned earth. Her tears fell freely as she whispered her final goodbyes, her heart breaking with each word. "I'm so sorry," she said over and over, her voice hoarse with grief. "I'll never forget you. I carry you with me always." Her parents stood by her, their hands resting on her shoulders, offering silent support. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the cemetery, and as the last rays of light disappeared behind the horizon, Lovat felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the end of her pain, she knew that grief would be her companion for a long time to come, but it was the beginning of healing. The journey would be long and difficult, but with her parents by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. As they walked away from the graves, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of laughter and friendship. Lovett closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, and for a brief moment, she could almost feel her friends beside her, guiding her forward into a future where their memories would live on.